very happy to be here and having a discussion with the product management group. I love talking about product. Let me just see. That's great brief introduction. And I'll just add that I can be found if people are looking for me later. I'll share these slides, and you can see some links to where you can find me all around on Twitter, or I actually have a newsletter that I send out using Product Stack here, Substack, that will actually cover a number of the concepts around pricing on some of the past articles that I've written. And today I'm going to talk about product pricing principles, and I am going to take questions at the end, and I guess throughout, if people chat in, and Piyush, you want to interrupt me to take some questions, I'm happy to do that during the session as well.
Sure, we can take the questions later on as well. I'll buzz you if there are any questions coming up in between.
Okay, great. Thanks. So let's start by just asking the question, what is pricing? And for many of us, the thought of pricing is simply it's how we capture value in exchange for the goods or services that we're providing. What I'm going to talk about today is a lot more around how the pricing is set, the context of that pricing, and what it means beyond just a value that you're going to try to capture. And the first thing that really needs to be understood by the product management community is that pricing is a feature. The price is a feature, just like a function to perform some task with your product is another feature. And what this means is that product management should have a large role in defining what that feature is, because you do all the research around the features, the requirements that the users and customers have. You are best positioned to define the exact pricing and the structure of the pricing for your products. And lastly, pricing is beyond just a feature. It's core to the positioning of your product. So there's an overlap, in my view, a great overlap between product management and product marketing. Positioning is is often thought of as a product marketing function. But just like all the key attributes of your products, the pricing plays a pivotal role in how you position it. Are you a low-cost provider? Are you a premium provider? How do you structure the pricing? How do you go to market? Is there, let's say, a freemium marketing model that you're competing against other alternative solutions in the marketplace? So these are sort of the fundamental characteristics of what pricing is. And now, before we start actually jumping in and thinking, oh, how do we come up with the pricing, we have to first consider the context that we're operating in. Sorry, just want to make sure I got time here. So that starts with thinking about all the internal factors that you have in your organization for setting the pricing. And this starts first and foremost with your business model. So the business model is going to define not just how your product or products are solving certain problems in a given market segment, but they're going to describe how you actually go to market and make money. Do you use third parties to sell your products? Do you sell directly on your website? Is it a SaaS-based product? Are you selling to enterprises? Are you selling to consumers? Maybe you have a marketplace structure or an advertising-based sort of business model where your users use your products for free primarily, but you intend to make all of your money, all your revenue off of advertising or some other parties that are not your users. So that business model is going to be a real determining factor and driving the context for all of the pricing considerations that you have. The next is your business strategy. And I'll just sort of simplify this in saying, so if you have your business model and that's defined and your strategy sort of helps you achieve that business model, at any point in time, you have a strategy for furthering that business model, for perhaps expanding into a new region, or expanding your product lines, or maybe moving up or down market in the customer segments that you serve. So this has a huge bearing on the pricing strategy that you're going to formulate that we'll go into shortly. Next, portfolio. Any single product within a business does not act on its own. If you talk about retail strategies, for example, there's a lot of times where you have a loss leader. Maybe you're giving away something or selling it at a lower, less profitable price point in order to sell other products to your customers. So if you take, let's say you have a suite of products. Let's say you're someone like HubSpot that has a suite of CRM and sales products. They basically give away the contact management piece or sell it for very little so that they can drive some of the higher priced, higher value products. Now they're all products and you have to price them all individually and come up with a strategy, but they sit within a portfolio strategy of all of your products. So you have to be cognizant of that. And obviously in a startup situation, for example, most of the time you're working with a single product as you start, and then it starts having add-ons and then maybe related products. And as you grow, maybe you have entire separate product lines that you're selling. But the pricing for any one product has to fit within that overall product strategy and the portfolio strategy. Finally, there's this product life cycle. Just about anything that we're doing in product management and product marketing, we need to think about the life cycle stage of the product. And by this, I mean, are you just developing it? Are you introducing it to the market? Is it in a growth stage now? Is it sort of past its prime and you're just now generating strong cash flow from that product? Or maybe it's in a decline phase and you're phasing that product out. At any point in that life cycle, you're going to be thinking about pricing both the structure and your strategy and the price points a little bit differently. And we'll talk about some of the specifics that you may be thinking about as you go through those different phases. Now, besides the internal factors, there are plenty of external factors. One of the biggest ones is the product category that you're working in. So if you have a product that you're introducing or selling within a well-established product category, let's say a browser or an email client or the CRM example I gave before, that is going to define a certain level of maturity within that category. And depending on how mature that category is, you're going to have some different competitive pressures. You're going to have different expectations by your customers for what the features are going to be within that product. And as I said before, pricing is a feature. So if you have a very mature product category that you're operating in, there's going to be a lot higher pre-existing expectations for what the pricing is going to be like for any new customers that you engage with. The next one is perceived value, and this is an external factor in my view because it's coming from the market, but it's something that you have a lot of control over. And this is the perceived value of solving a particular problem that your product is setting out to solve. So if the customers obviously have a high perceived value on the problem that they have, they may be willing to pay a premium price for it. If it's in a mature product category, you may have some other pressures on that. But the perceived value is key, because that's going to give you the ability to move up your price points if it's a higher perceived value. Next is the competitive situation, and this goes a lot to the positioning, because positioning is all about how your product fits within the competitive alternatives in the market that your customers or your target market have, whether they're internal builds, do nothing, or buying other competitive products in the market. So how your competitors operate, how they sell their product, how they deliver value to the customers, how they differentiate themselves, that's going to have an impact on how you need to set a pricing for your products as well. Now, you may decide to imitate that, to set your price higher or lower, or to do something very different. And this is part of your strategy, but this is a key bit of data that you need to understand as you're starting to think about your pricing strategy. The last one I put here is market health, and this is really important as we're sitting here in the time of COVID-19. The greater context that we're operating in is the health of the market and the conditions of the economy, and the well-being of your potential customer base. Are people out of work? Are they not traveling? Are they not doing the things right now that would create more demand for your product? Maybe they are doing more of something that creates more demand for your product, like home exercise equipment or something. But it's really important when you're setting pricing and a pricing strategy to think about that. And as I talk later about the importance of continually revisiting your pricing strategy and the price points that you have, market health is a key reason for that, because the conditions that exist today may not be the conditions that exist tomorrow. Okay, so jumping into some of the nuts and bolts now of pricing. There are lots of different pricing models out there and pricing strategies and philosophies around it, but I'm going to boil it down to some simpler ones that actually are core to most of the work that software product managers do. And we'll start with cost plus, which is the one that we use least frequently. Cost plus pricing models are simple, and they're used heavily in commodities, not so much in software, and I'll explain why in a minute. Very simply, you understand your cost of goods sold. How much does it take you to develop and market your product so that you can bring it to market? And then you add an incremental margin on top of that. So if it costs you $10 to produce a good, and you want to make a margin of 50%, you sell it for $15. That's cost plus. Now in software, that doesn't make a lot of sense. In particular, in SaaS products, it doesn't make a lot of sense, because we're not dealing with a physical good most of the time. So it may make more sense in technology products and hardware, but not as much in software for sure. In software, we're dealing much more with competitive-based pricing models and value-based pricing models. So we'll just start with competitive very simply. In a situation where you want to basically benchmark your competition and set your pricing around that, based somewhere around that competition, we'll call that competitive pricing. So if you're selling product management software, you're going to look at all the competitive offerings that are out there, figure out what they're selling for, and then price your product on a relative basis to theirs. Now you will, if they're selling it for $10 and you think that you provide actually more functionality or more value, you will generally sell it for a little bit more, unless you want to drive more market demand. If you think you have slightly fewer features than the primary competitors, you may price your product lower. So this is basic competitive pricing. The level of complexity in doing this is a little higher than cost plus because you have to do some market analysis. In particular, in enterprise software where there's not as much transparency in the pricing, let's say you're talking about ERP solutions or some advanced analytics software like those produced by Palantir, as an example, where there's not really any transparency in the market and the pricing. It's a lot harder to do competitive pricing. And to do that, we generally do a lot of win-loss analysis. We do a lot of research online to see if we can discover any, let's say, published government pricing or announced sales wins that these competitors have to try to ascertain about how they're pricing their products. But this makes it a lot harder in those markets where it's fuzzy, where things are more commodities, and a lot of SaaS-based products where you can go online and simply see what the pricing is. Competitive-based pricing is a little bit easier because of that transparency. And the same holds true when you put your pricing up there. The last option is really the best option for software vendors, in my view. In particular, when you're in a new category, but it works great in an existing product category, and that's value-based pricing. This is where we want to be because it's going to allow us to eventually drive the highest price points and create the highest profit margins for our products. So what is value-based pricing? It is assessing what the value is you're bringing to your customer and setting your price based on that. So if your competitor is charging $10 for a widget and you look out there and you say, look, actually, I see that I can save my customer or help them generate an extra $1 million a year in revenue, it doesn't make sense to charge $10 for my product. I can charge $100 for my product, and they'll just as easily want to take that product because it can generate a huge return on investment for them. So doing value-based pricing can create the most return for you in your pricing. It is the hardest to do because you have to convince your customers of the value that you're creating for them. So generally over time, as you have more customers and you create more success stories where you can show actual benefits that other customers have had with your products, you use those success stories with their metrics where they increased their revenue 10 times or saved 50% on their infrastructure spend by using your product. You're able to then show them that value and have some credible point at which you can then set your value-based pricing. Now, it's important when you're setting value-based pricing that you need to recognize that when you set your value-based pricing, you're going to set it at a fraction of the value you're creating for your customer. So if you can create an additional $1 million in revenue, they're not going to give you $1 million for your product. They will give you maybe 10% of that back, 5% of that back, 20% if you're lucky, if you can convince them that it's very low risk to take your product and achieve the same results. So that's where we see that most software companies tend to go, especially in newer product categories. If you're entering in a market where it's very competitive and somewhat commoditized. You'll see much more competitive benchmark kind of pricing where, oh, all the other guys are selling something for that much. I have to set my pricing around that, regardless of the value that I think I'm creating for my customer. Okay, so now let's talk about the approaches to your pricing strategy. And here again, there are lots of different options for your strategy of how you leverage these pricing models based on the context that you're operating in. I'm going to talk about 3 basic strategies that that most of the time we're operating in, although it's usually some variation off of these. The first and the most interesting to me is called skimming. Skimming is a strategy where when you enter a market with a new product, could be just a brand new version of a product in an existing category, or you're generally creating a whole new product category, you are going to charge a premium. You're going to charge the highest initial price for that product that you think the market can bear. And this is because you're going to be going after early adopters that have the greatest pain point or greatest need or have the greatest perceived value in the product that you're offering. Apple is famous for doing a skimming pricing strategy when they bring a product to market, like the iPhone. They're charging a huge premium, and then over time, they're going to decrease that product as time goes on, especially as they introduce new versions of it. But that's skimming. Now, usually when you do a skimming approach, that is a type of value-based pricing. You're going to be looking at the value that you're bringing to the market. And for early adopters, in the example of the iPhone, maybe it's a real functional value, but maybe it's the perceived value and sort of reputation you get for having the latest gadget. That's an approach of value-based pricing and a skimming strategy on top of it. The next one is relatively simple and straightforward. I talked about competitive pricing model where you're basically looking for how your competition prices within a category. So obviously you need existing competition, so you need a defined category or something close to what you're offering in that market category. And then you're going to set competitively to that. Now, this does not mean that you're going to price exactly the same way they do, or you're going to define the offering exactly the same. But you'll generally be pricing within a range around the competition so that in essence, you're going to negate the pricing as a differentiated feature of your product. And this gives you the possibility to now focus on other value add of your product and to try to differentiate it in different ways, simply removing pricing as an obstacle to comparisons when customers are comparison shopping. The last approach I want to talk about is penetration strategy, and this applies whether you're doing competitive modeling or value-based. Once you identify where the market is, where it's either by the value that you think you can return to your customers or where the competitors are, you can decide that your goal, your sort of strategy to support your business needs is to gain more market share. And to do this, we use a penetration strategy where we're going to set the price point below the value we think that it brings to the customer or below competitive offerings in the market. If done well, and you can see that there is some parity with other competitors in the market, you're going to end up gaining market share if you're doing an effective job of marketing your product. Of course, there can be long-term problems with the penetration strategy, but this is in particular an important strategy if you're bringing a new product to market into an existing well-defined category, and your hope is to sort of out-execute the existing incumbents, or you just want to gain enough market share before you create other differentiated value. And this is a great way to do that. All right, so moving beyond that, now we want to start talking about, we have our context that we're operating in. We have different strategic options of how we're going to go into the market. Now we need to really think about all the different variables that go into setting the price point. And it goes far beyond just saying, I have a widget, customer needs a widget, there's competitive widgets out there, here's how I'm pricing. I have on the right-hand side a nice, really nice screenshot that encapsulates a number of these concepts that I'll talk through here. The first is about packaging and tiers. Packaging your product is sometimes left to product marketing or marketing, but it's really part of the pricing. And this is to say, what are the features in your product that you're going to offer at a certain price point? Do you offer feature A, B, and C? And do you leave D and E to another, let's say, another tier? So in the example on the right, we can see that Notion has created 4 different tiers for their packaged offerings. They've got, first it's segmented to individuals and business sort of offerings. At the individual level, you have the free version, this freemium approach, and then a personal pro at $4 a month. In that, you see certain features, unlimited file uploads, unlimited guests, version history. And then at the team level for $8 a month, you see some different features packaged into the product. So it's really important to understand when you're pricing what features are important to the customers that you're trying to deliver to. Now, going back to the context that we talked about early on, where I didn't go into too much detail, one of the key considerations of your business model is, okay, who are your actual economic buyers? Who's going to buy your product and who's going to use your product? So in selling to consumers, it's very straightforward. It's generally the person that's using it is the person buying it, that product. So you have to appeal to them with the features in their packaged offering that drive the most value. Within business offerings, usually you're selling to someone different than the actual users, and you have to balance what's in that packaged product with what the buyers are interested in, what the users need, with how you package up both the tiering and set the pricing. The next thing to consider is the price discrimination. And if you see the team-based package that Notion has, you see it's $8 per member per month. So they've decided that not only are they going to, they have a different packaged offering at that tier, but they're doing something called price discrimination, which is they figured out where the key value point is that differentiates their customers that are using a lot of your product and getting a lot of value out of it versus those that don't derive that much value. And this is critical in any product to understand so that you do not end up giving away at a low price point, $8 a month, a product to someone that's generating substantially more value out of that offering than another customer. So you need to figure out what that is. So in my experience, it could be on a transaction volume level. It could be on the size of the company that you're selling to. It could be, if it's an HR system, it could be based on the number of employees. These different dimensions, if you will, are what we talk about when we say price discrimination. So you're going to price your product and discriminate it on some attribute like that, either going up for each user or each sort of incremental point, or it could be on tiers, like every 10 users or 50 users, you give them a price break and they charge them additional. So that's price discrimination. A few other concepts I'll just mention here briefly are the list price, which we all know about. This is hopefully we know about. This is like the $8 that's listed there. But you see they don't list the price for enterprise. And this is because of the complexity in their pricing, and they want to make sure that they don't put a number there that the enterprise customers are either never going to accept because it'll end up being $1 million a month, or it will be way too low and they're going to leave a bunch of money on the table. So the list price is something that this company probably has listed internally, how they want to price it, but they give some kind of discount now and some authority to the sales team at Notion, according to some discounting policy for how to structure deals for larger enterprise customers. Maybe it's a great logo they want to get. Maybe if they get a reference from them, maybe they just have a lot of different price discrimination points that they want to be able to use, and it'll be too confusing to publish that on the website. So to keep it simple and to have that conversation with the potential enterprise customers, they leave that in the hands of a sales rep that has some authority according to a discounting policy to structure a deal that'll work for that enterprise. I'm going to leave off, for the sake of time, a couple other items here. We can definitely come back to these if there's questions at the end around complexity, license price. Renewal period I'll mention because this comes up a lot. You can see at the bottom on this, pay annually or pay monthly. So from a pricing standpoint, there is a great additional value for any company that you can drive longer term contracts with your customers. So every time the customer has to make a buying decision, that's another chance for them to decide not to renew. So you want to give them a carrot and always make them want to renew. But a best practice is to try to find a way to drive them to buy a longer term contract, either annually, 3 years if it's enterprise software. And you can give them a discount for that because you're saving the risk of potential churn when they do renew. Okay, just a couple more and then we'll open it up for questions. Okay, so now we have all these sort of input variables that go into it, and now we'll probably get to the thing that everybody was hoping I would start with, which is, okay, how do you set the price? This is usually the first question I have. I have this product. How do I know if I can charge $10 or $1,000 for it? And as I walk through the presentation, I don't like that approach. I like to start with the context and start thinking through what you're trying to do as a business and the value that your customers might perceive from it. The first thing that I always ask you to do, even though you're not generally doing cost plus pricing, is to understand your unit economics, your unit cost structure on the product that you're selling. Because if nothing else, this is going to help you understand the profitability as you scale up and get more customers. As a product person, it's very important to understand how profitable your products are. Next, regardless of the approach you're taking, it's important to understand competitive pricing. How do they package up their products? What are the features they include in each pricing tier, if they've got tiers that they share? What's the general range and the way that they discriminate their pricing? Because that's going to play into the mind of your customers. Now, next, for value-based pricing, this is where we start getting interesting. We start having to analyze the value that you're bringing to the market. How can we assess the potential revenue gain, cost savings, or maybe the risk that our customers will have reduced by leveraging our product? A lot of this is going to be, let's say, based on some educated guesses when you're first entering a market. And this is much easier after you've got a handful of clients that are using that product, a handful of customers. So as you build up more, you can do a better job of assessing the value that you're bringing to the market. And in that way, you'll do a better job of setting pricing correctly. Now, for those that like a more scientific method, there are some really good approaches that aren't used that much in the SaaS world, for example, but conjoint analysis, for those that aren't familiar, this is let's say a statistical way to look at surveys of different feature mixes that you have in your product. Let's say you've got a TV that you're offering, and you've got different features that you want to sell at in different models of that TV. You can send surveys out to potential customers to assess where they see the value mix breaking down. And that will help you understand where you can charge a premium, which features belong in the premium one, which ones you can drop out of lower priced versions of that same product that you're bringing to market. This can work well if you're selling something like, let's say if you're Microsoft and you're trying to assess your productivity suite and your different pricing tiers. The last tool is really interesting in theory. It doesn't work so well in software products, in my experience, but it can be used. And this is the price sensitivity analysis. It's based on 4 basic questions that you survey your market in, and it has to be a fairly well-defined category so that the people that you're surveying can understand it well. First question is, at what price would this product be so expensive that you wouldn't consider buying it? Second, so it's too expensive. At what price would this product be so inexpensive that you would think it's cheaply made and it's not going to last, it's not going to actually fulfill on its promise? And then the questions in the middle are, at what price would it be just starting to get too expensive that you would still have to give it serious consideration to decide whether or not you would buy it? And on the flip side, where would it be getting so cheap, so inexpensive that you would start saying, wow, this is a really good value at this price point. I have to buy this. The diagram on the right is sort of diagramming out the answers to those questions, and what you end up with is a pricing range for a given product. Again, this works really well in a well-defined product category that has very specific attributes with the products that you're selling. All right, so I want to cover one more topic before I wrap it up and leave at least a little time for questions here. And this is the pricing team. I described at the beginning that pricing is a feature. It's a key part of product positioning. So you understand, okay, this is like product management and marketing. This will evolve over time depending on the stage of your organization. If you're a startup and you have just a few people, maybe it's the founder that's leading pricing. As you start to grow, it should be someone like product manager or product marketing that is leading that discussion and constantly evaluating and reviewing the product strategy. But as you get larger and you start having a portfolio of products, usually the individual product manager is not directly responsible for pricing strategy or the actual price points, but they should be a key contributor to it, and maybe a senior product person, the head of product, VP of product, head of a product line. They're going to represent the product's management stakeholders, as well as you need to have stakeholders from sales, operations, legal, of course, and finance, because they understand the metrics and how to generate, how you're going to recognize revenue. Marketing, in particular, if you're doing a skimming strategy, you really need marketing on your side because you have to sell the brand and the value that you're hoping to deliver to your customers. So this is critical, and I want all the product managers that are out there that are newer, have been around for a while, and I've done surveys where not that many product managers are directly owning or heavily engaged in product pricing. If you're not, you need to be. You need to start asking more questions. You need to be at least getting into the conversation because it is a key feature of your product, and nobody really understands the benefits it's delivering to your customers better than you do. And that's it. So I'm going to wrap it up here around some key takeaways. One is pricing is a key feature. It's critical to your product positioning. There's a lot of context, internal and external, you need to consider before setting a price. And there are scientific approaches. You don't just sort of put your finger in the air and pick a price point, but whether you're doing that or using a scientific approach to set that initial pricing, you need to constantly be revisiting your pricing and your strategy because the market conditions could be changing, your stage in your business and product life cycle could be changing over time, and they should be. Your portfolio mix will be changing. And finally, pricing should never be left to one person. It definitely shouldn't be left to sales just to go and make up their pricing. It should be a strategic decision, and setting the pricing and the structure around how you price should be done by a team of those that each have a stake in it. And that's it. So I'll stop there. I spoke for quite a while. I know questions came up. I hope that I left some good questions out there. You can always reach me at my email or contact me through social media if you want, or at my website. And that's it. I hope I'd be happy to take some questions now.
Thanks a lot for this entire session, Sean. So we have few questions in our chat section.
Sorry, I don't have the chat up. Can you?
Yeah, sure. I'll read them up. So first question is from Shrishti. How the pricing works for marketplace products?
Oops. How pricing works for marketplace products. Marketplace is. Sorry. Trying to reshare while I'm talking here. So marketplace is very interesting, and it's a little bit, it goes to that business model discussion that I talked about. Depending on if you have a two-side or multi-sided marketplace, one of the first things that you have to figure out is how your business is going to make money. And some of these questions, I didn't say it, but there's sort of there's got to be a feedback loop all the time. As you're assessing the value, looking at how the competitors operate within competing marketplaces, that's going to impact maybe your thinking. But really, usually in a marketplace, you're going to end up getting your revenue from only one portion of that market, or different pricing from different sides of that market. So if you've got, let's say, a marketplace with, let's say, merchants and, I don't know, product providers and customers, you've got three sides to that marketplace. You have to think through the value that you're delivering to each side of that. Now, the nice thing with a marketplace is that this now gives you some additional levers to pull, where you can, let's say, make something much lower cost, and let's say the merchants get much higher perceived value out of it for the price they're paying, because you could then charge more to somebody on the other side of that marketplace. I guess without going into so many details around marketplaces, you have to think about your current status within that marketplace and what part of it you want to grow the most, and those people you want to give the greatest return on value. So that means setting pricing at a lower point to even free to get them in and drive up the volume there, and then you derive your revenue probably off the side of the market that's easier to attract into it.
Thanks for that answer. Next question is from Sabu. Companies like, yeah, yeah. So companies like Google, AWS, Microsoft, Azure do elastic pricing. Uh, very tiny amount is charged for each little usage of something. How
Right.
come SaaS products are not sold that way? Uh, he adds to the question. I often stare at 4 columns of pricing page for many SaaS offerings without able to take a decision. I often want some features, but not all from these 3 columns. Why can't these products also be sold like Google AWS?
Yeah. So this is here is psychology and complexity. So there's a few problems with selling like that, and one is that you don't want to create a lot of friction with your customers by creating a lot of a la carte options. The more complex you make it, the more likely, typically, you're going to turn customers away. So, like the Notion example I just put up here, I mean, they could figure out a way to charge some incremental amount for each feature that they've got in their product. But what's going to be the experience of a customer that joins now and has to pick incrementally each of those features? Now they're going to be making all sorts of friction for those potential customers when they join. And moreover, there's going to be a different buying decision on each feature. Right? So each feature that you look at, you're going to say, is that feature worth it for me or not? Is that feature worth it for me or not? So from the vendor's perspective, that's you don't want that. You don't want to create that friction, that obstacle to making an easy buying decision. The second thing is from a customer perspective, it gets difficult, and especially I have a great deal of experience in enterprise products where every time I want to add new capabilities to my product, I don't want my customers to feel that I'm nickel and diming them, that I'm going to then charge them more to get that next extra little bit. They're paying me all along in a SaaS product to keep deriving value, and they expect that value to at least incrementally increase over time for the amount of money that they're paying me. That's there's a general sort of expectation out there of that. So you have to keep providing more value. Now, how do you do that? You make the existing capabilities better, and you add new capabilities, maybe because competitors have them, or you see that there's a real need for a new capability that helps solve the underlying problems that your customers have better. So that's basically why we want to bundle things up and package them, is to make it an easier conversation between the vendor and the customer. It doesn't always work like that. I mean, sometimes, as in your example, a customer will look and say, I only need 2 features of the 10 that they're selling there, or I want the personal pro, but I just want 1 feature off the team one. This is definitely intentional, because it makes you make that decision to jump up and pay twice as much money to get to that next tier, just to get that simple feature. And you, as a product manager, have to do a lot of analysis to figure out what those breakpoints are between those tiers, because it is a risky decision to make, and that's why you have to revisit it all the time.
Thanks. I hope that answers your question, Sabu. Next question is from Abhinav. Uh, how does pricing gets decided for a SaaS product like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, where market is too competitive?
How does the pricing get decided? So really, they do a lot of competitive pricing there. So, you know, when Zoom came on the market, their pricing for their paid tiers are similar to, you know, GoToMeeting or WebEx, like all of those products. They're very similar for a similar product. Now, so they're using a competitive strategy, and what they want to do is they want to differentiate it somehow. So what Zoom did is they went with a marketing strategy of offering a freemium product. They also, you know, obviously invested a lot in creating a better experience, you know, many would say, in their product. But that freemium approach of sort of driving leads into the product and then hopefully creating a sticky experience where they would buy into theirs over competitive offerings is, you know, what helped them get a lot of their initial traffic, especially when people started using their product a lot more during the coronavirus crisis here. So it's that competitive price point. Now, alternatively, someone like, I don't know, Google or Microsoft Meet, they may look at that and say, we are not competing necessarily on apples to apples. We don't want to compete just against Zoom's product for video conferencing with Microsoft Meet. Instead, we're offering a different product, something that's very differentiated. So when they differentiate it like that and say, actually, Meet is more like a combination of Zoom and Slack combined and some, I don't know, some document management. That allows them to then have a different price point, a higher price point. But they then come into the problem where, of course, competitively, if I'm coming in and I just need a video conferencing product, I'm comparing Meet against Zoom. I'm going to pick the one that provides me better return on my investment. And if features were all the same for that portion of Meet, I'm just going to pick Zoom because they're going to offer me, you know, a lower price point for just that offering as opposed to Meet, which may be twice the pricing. And flip side, Microsoft may end up, by bundling all that, end up having to sell it at a lower price point because they know people are comparing Meet to Zoom, even though they're bundling a lot more products. This is where a strategy like Microsoft is much more about selling a complete business solution, which has a lot of different aspects to it, rather than the a la carte piece, which you know, enterprise buyers like that a lot because it's fewer vendors to deal with and a much more integrated stack of technologies. I hope that answers that a little bit. That's definitely where portfolio strategy and the business strategy start getting much more complicated and influence the specific product pricing.
Yeah. So next question we have from Sri Vidya. How do you decide a price point if it is a percentage of a transaction? How do you show value between 1.5% versus a 2% of a transaction?
How do you show value? So, well, it depends on what you're doing, right? So if I'm selling, let's say if I'm personal experience, if I'm selling fraud prevention software to payment providers, right? And I can save them a certain amount of fraud losses. Let's say I can reduce their fraud losses by 20% by using my advanced fraud software. I'm gonna then try to set a price point that I think the payment providers will find tolerable in order to get that benefit. And they don't know for sure until they use my product exactly, you know, what benefit they'll get, and they'll never even know for certain that if they weren't using my product that it would have that they would have had those additional fraud losses. So there's a bit of psychology there about what they did have to what they have now. But you know, so setting that price point then becomes this is the value I'm providing. do you see enough value in that to give me a 1% of the payment or 2% of the payment? And then you have the competitive pressure of, okay, there's alternative fraud prevention software out there, and they're only charging 0.5%. Then you're competing on the relative value and the total cost of ownership of working with you as a provider.
Right.
I hope that gives a sense. I think what's important is there is no perfect price on a product. You have to test and experiment a little. You can use some scientific approaches to get that initial pricing, to come up with and test the hypothesis on what you believe is the right way to package and structure your pricing. But you need to continuously test the market and see what the pressures are that could drive it one way or another, from internal and external factors.
Thanks for that answer. Then there are few questions that are related to this one only. I'll skip them for now because we are short on time.
Okay.
Next question is from Carolyn. When should products be priced in 30 days cycle instead of monthly?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
When should products be priced in 30-day cycles instead of monthly?
30-day cycles instead of monthly?
Yes.
You know what? I'm not even familiar with a product that's priced on 30-day cycles.
So
I can't.
Carolyn, if you can speak up, it will be better to understand. Okay. Meanwhile, we can take up the next question.
Sure. I'm
Next
sorry.
one.
If you want, I'd be happy to follow up with you after if you want to try and ping me on that, whoever asked that question.
Next question is from Mohan. What kind of inputs that a product manager needs to have in mind when they are part of pricing team for enterprise applications? Do they go feature by feature of a product to price each feature, or do they strategically group or categorize set of features and price them?
So this is where it depends a little bit on the specific product category you're in, but generally, if you have a large enterprise software product and you've got multiple product managers working on that product, you're not going to be pricing every individual feature. And this goes to the discussion I had before, where enterprise customers usually don't like the nickel and diming for a variety of reasons. One is they feel like if every feature that you're talking about you've got a price point on, that's a problem. If they need a discussion on each of those. Also, the value that you're delivering to the customer is generally not based on a single feature. A single feature may have value to the customer, but a single feature does not solve the big problem for them. And they're usually comparing you against other products that are solving, the big problem, not some specific slice of it. So generally speaking, that means that the product managers that are responsible for that slice of the product need to give input to someone that has a more complete view of the product offering, that is ultimately representing the product perspective in pricing strategy and pricing.
Yeah, I hope that answers. Next question is from Maria. She says, Sean, this is Maria here. Loved your presentation and topic. And then she has a question. How do you manage the buy-in from other stakeholders, mainly business team? In this context, do you influence the decision or do you propose pricing models?
So I'm guessing the context here is in an organization where, let's say, product management is not currently doing this actively. how do you influence it? Yeah, I mean, it depends on the dynamics a bit of your organization. I mean, I would start by understanding exactly who is deciding on the pricing strategy and setting the price points today, and working to influence them specifically. So if it's, you know, your chief marketing officer or head of sales, or maybe if you're a product manager and it's your head of product and you don't realize that they're doing this, you need to identify that person and then sort of instigate the conversation around it and start sharing. At least what you can start doing is say that you need to understand more about how this is being defined, because not only do you provide input into the pricing strategy and pricing points, but the price points that are set, they also impact the product requirements. So if you are, let's say, you know, deciding to discriminate your pricing based on transaction volume, your product better be able to monitor the transaction volume. So you need to be a part of that conversation, because it goes two ways. So I would start there. And, you know, I do have experience where pricing is getting set by, you know, like sales teams and marketing, and then product finds out that, oh yeah, this is how we sold it, and it's like, well, we can't enforce that pricing structure, that licensing model. It doesn't work, and you need to be able to have that conversation and start by trying to identify where it's starting in your organization, and start having the discussion of, hey, you know, this is two ways. I do a lot of research on what the user behavior is, on the value they get out of this. I understand the competition very clearly, and if you don't know these things, you should. So you should get these arrows in your quiver, and you also need the feedback. Prices just can't be set, and pricing structures can't be set without making sure that they actually fit the way the product works. So that's how I would start.
Thanks, Scene. So we are short on time, so I'll take two last questions and then we can wind up.
Okay, great.
So next question is from Vinod. How is dynamic pricing arrived at?
So dynamic pricing is, I will say dynamic pricing is not something I have a lot of experience with, but usually in a marketplace setting where there is some liquidity in that market, you'll find more dynamic pricing mechanisms set up. So it's really about, you know, matching supply and demand, and being able to set up things like the way Uber does surge pricing or something like that, where you're basically assessing on the product side the demand for a product and your ability to satisfy it with a high degree of value. Usually you don't want to take advantage of those situations, but you want to make them based on some actual economics of your business, and then you won't have a backlash like in my Uber example, where surge pricing got out of control in some situations, and it seemed like they were just trying to profit by a lack of supply in particular market.
So here we can wind up the session. Thanks a lot, Sean, for taking out time and conducting this session for Pragmatic Leaders. We really enjoyed the session, and I hope everyone got some concrete takeaways from today's session.
Great. Thank you for hosting me. I enjoyed the conversation.